Shut your mouth, you're nothing but a fraud. Hawley roars, but Jasmine Crockett slams and a red folder with FBI-marked emails exposing $3.5 million in corporate bribes tied to America's staggering $1.77 trillion student debt crisis. Gasps echo through Congress, the lit stream explodes with millions of viewers, and Hawley's face turns pale on national TV. But what deadly line will Crockett unleash next that could finish his career in seconds? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The roar of the crowd hit like a thunderclap, rolling across the marble steps of the Capitol. Thousands of students pressed against barricades, their voices tearing through the winter air, fists raised high, signs flashing under the camera lights. Debt equals chains. $200,000 equals no future. Helicopters carve circles above the dome, the sound of their blades pounding like war drums. Media trucks jammed the avenues, satellite dishes tilting toward the sky, feeding every scream, every chant, every heartbeat. To millions watching across the nation, this was not just another protest, it was the ignition point of a storm. The camera cut through the chaos to focus on trembling faces, a young woman clutching her graduation cap cover in glittering letters. First in my family. A father in scuffed work boots lifted his child onto his shoulders, the toddler waving a paper flag scrawled with the words, "Forgive us our loans." The crowd chanted louder, voices rising in unison until they shook the barricades. No more debt, no more debt. Officers in neon vests shifted uneasily, forming a fragile line between fury and the cold stone walls of power. Inside the broadcast booth, the anchor's voice dropped to a whisper, as if speaking into the eye of a hurricane. 43 million Americans in debt. $1.77 trillion owed. Tonight, the fight begins. The words cut through the roar like a blade, flashing across ticker tapes and screens from New York to Los Angeles. Reporters jammed their pens against notepads. Cameramen panned across the sea of signs, as if searching for the face that best captured a nation on edge. The air smelled of sweat, diesel fumes, and the faint metallic taste of fear. A drumbeat rose from deep within the crowd, each strike sensing with the pulse of the marchers. Phones lifted like a forest of glowing eyes, live streams shooting upward to digital platforms, where hashtags exploded. Hashtag debt crisis, hashtag Crockett vs Hawley, hashtag 1.77 trillion. Every second, the tension thickened, every frame captured carrying the weight of lives shackled to a number that seemed too monstrous to fight. Then came the whisper that cut through the chanting. She's here. A black SUV pulled up to the barricade, doors swinging open in perfect synchronization. Jasmine Crockett stepped out, her red folder gripped like a weapon, her eyes scanning the crowd, with the calm of a soldier walking into battle. Cheers erupted, drowning out the helicopter blades, the chant bending, reshaping into a single name. Jasmine, Jasmine. Across the plaza, a smaller group of counter-protesters answered with their own chant. Hawley, Hawley. Two storms spiraling toward collision, the Capitol doors loomed, heavy and silent, as though holding their breath. Cameramen scrambled for position, lenses trained, red lights blinking. Producers in the control room whispered to one another, voices cracking with adrenaline. This is it. Don't blink. Outside, the crowd leaned forward as one body, the line between hope and fury vanishing into a single demand. Justice. And as Jasmine Crockett crossed the threshold, her figure swallowed by the shadows of the chamber, the question rippled outward to every screen, every living room, every beating heart watching live. What will happen when two of the fiercest voices in Congress collide under the nation's eyes? The gavel slammed, and the chamber fell into a fragile silence. Every eye locked on the man already leaning toward the microphone with a predator's grin. Hawley did not wait. His voice cracked like a whip. Why should a plumber in Missouri pay off loans for Ivy League lawyers? The line tore through the chamber like a lightning strike, detonating applause on one side and a chorus of boos on the other. Reporters jolted forward in their seats, pens scribbling like daggers, while cameras zoomed in on his clenched jaw, sweat glistening under the harsh lights. Hawley thrived in the chaos. He lifted a finger toward the gallery, eyes blazing with the confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. This is what's wrong with America. Elites rack up debt for their fancy degrees, and now they expect the working men and women people in Missouri to pay for their mistakes. Not on my watch. His words cut deep, rehearsed but dripping with venom, designed to weaponize resentment and sharpen division. The counter-protesters outside roared his name, their voices faint but furious. a ghostly chorus rattling the glass panes of the Capitol. A young woman in the gallery stood, her voice trembling as she shouted, "We're drowning." Guards rushed to escort her out, but her cry lingered in the chamber like smoke. Hawley pounced, slamming his palm against the desk. Exactly. Entitlement on display for the whole nation. They don't want accountability, they want handouts. This is the disease rotting our country. His face twisted with fury, his voice swelling louder, forcing the microphones to crackle under the strain. The camera cut to Jasmine Crockett. She had not moved. Her hands rested on the red folder before her, her eyes locked on Hawley with an unblinking calm that burned hotter than any shout. To the millions watching live, the split screen told a story. Hawley spitting fire, Crockett a wall of ice, silent but seething, waiting. Her chest rose slowly, every breath measured, every heartbeat sensing with the chance outside that now bent into her name. James mine. James mine. But Hawley wasn't done. He leaned closer, his voice dropping into a venomous growl meant to wound. Life isn't fair. Stop whining. Stop begging. Start working. That's what my people do in Missouri. Maybe Congresswoman Crockett should take notes instead of playing savior for freeloaders. The insult cracked across the chamber like a gunshot. Gasps rippled through the rows. A senator shifted uncomfortably. Even the gavel struggled to contain the explosion of shouts and jeers that followed. For a moment, it felt as if the whole nation leaned forward, holding its breath. The fury of Hawley's words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion, choking and heavy, daring anyone to cut through it. And there sat Jasmine Crockett, silent still, but her stare unyielding, her red folder glowing like an unpulled trigger. The room vibrated with anticipation. The control room whispered, "Get ready. She's about to strike." And across millions of screens, from living rooms to dormitories to union halls, the same question rose like a drumbeat in every heart. Can Jasmine Crockett turn his fire back on him and burn him with it? For a moment, the chamber vibrated with Hawley's last insult, the echo of freeloaders still stinging in the air. Reporters' pens froze, cameras lingered, and the crowd outside thundered her name. Then, slowly, deliberately, Jasmine Crockett rose to her feet. The movement felt cinematic, every eye following as she straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and placed a thick red folder on the table before her with a thud that cracked the silence. The room shifted. Hawley's smirk faltered, ever so slightly, as the lens cut to Crockett's stare, sharp, cold, unblinking, like a blade being unsheathed. She leaned into the microphone, her voice steady but heavy with restrained fire. "Fairness. How fair is it when corporations, the very ones bankrolling you, profit from the pain of America's students?" The line landed like an explosion. Gasps rippled across the rows, the gallery erupted in cheers, and reporters bent over keyboards, fingers hammering. The split screen went live. Hawley clenching his jaw, Crockett steady as stone, the crowd outside shaking the barricades. On Twitter, the hashtag Crockett vs Hawley shot upward, trending within seconds, as snippets of her words were clipped and shared, already racking up hundreds of thousands of views. CNN's Chiron updated in real time. Crockett strikes back, accuses Hawley of corporate ties. MSNBC called it the first blow of the night, but Crockett wasn't finished. She pressed her hand flat against the red folder, her eyes never leaving Hawley. This isn't about plumbers or Ivy League lawyers. This is about a system rigged so that ordinary Americans are chained to debt, while politicians like you smile for cameras and cash their checks from lenders. You speak of Missouri workers, Senator, but who's really paying you? The line dropped like a guillotine. Shouts rang out. Someone in the gallery yelled, "Tell it." Hawley shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his tide. His confidence, so unshakable moments ago, cracked just enough for cameras to catch it. The gavel slammed, demanding order, but the chamber buzzed like a live wire. A journalist whispered into her phone, "She's going for the kill." Another mouthed, "What's in the folder?" The question spread like wildfire online, in the press box, even among senators leaning forward, straining to see. Crockett allowed the suspense to build, her silence a weapon sharper than any word. She tapped the folder once, lightly, and the sound reverberated through the microphones. Hawley's eyes flickered toward it, betraying a flash of unease, and the cameras caught it instantly, magnifying it across millions of screens. She tilted her head, almost smiling, then delivered her parting shot. Inside this folder lies proof the American people deserve to see. The gallery gasped, the crowd outside roared, and social media exploded with speculation. And then, like a director cutting to black at the height of a scene, she stepped back from the microphone, leaving the nation suspended on the edge of revelation. What secret lies inside that red folder she just laid down? The chamber's tension had not yet settled from Crockett's red folder strike when the chairman called the next witness. A hush swept the gallery as a young woman rose from her seat, knees trembling, clutching a thin stack of papers that looked heavier than any stone. She was 23, from Missouri, her voice fragile, but wired with desperation, and the camera zoomed in close enough for America to see the tear shining on her cheek. She cleared her throat, and with the first crack of her voice, the room leaned forward. "My name is Emily Carter," she began, her tone breaking. "I owe $210,000 in student debt. I work 3 jobs, overnight shifts at a diner, weekends at a call center, and afternoons tutoring kids just to cover the interest." Not the balance, the interest. Her words sliced through the chamber like glass. Some senators dropped their eyes to the table. Others shifted in their seats, uneasy. The gallery stiffened, each syllable a wound. Emily lifted the papers in her hand, shaking, the microphone amplifying the rustle. "This is my life. Every line here is another month of drowning. I can't afford rent. I can't save for a future. I can't even dream anymore. My dream was to be a teacher, to give kids the education I never had. But now, my dream is just to not answer the phone when the debt collectors call." Her voice cracked, the sound bleeding raw across millions of televisions. Viewers at home saw not statistics, but a face-to-face breaking on live broadcast. The crowd outside, carry on microphones, erupted in chants. "No more debt, no more chains." The echo seeped into the chamber, rattling glass and nerves. Emily wiped her face with the back of her hand, shaking her head. "I did everything right," she whispered, words trembling like exposed wire. "I studied hard. I believed in the system. And the system left me in shackles." A sob broke free, echoing louder than any speech that had come before. Jasmine Crockett was on her feet before the guards could even move. She crossed to Emily, laying a hand gently on her shoulder. Cameras caught the moment, a snapshot that would circle the globe within hours. Crockett, steady and unyielding, comforting a young woman whose future was slipping through her fingers. The split screen burned into the public eye, compassion against cruelty, hope against despair. A reporter in the press box whispered, "This is the image that will haunt Hawley." The chairman's gavel slammed for order, but the silence that followed was electric, heavy with grief and fury. In the control room, a producer muttered, "This is going viral already," as hashtags flickered to life across social media feeds. Hashtag debt is chains, hashtag Emily speaks, hashtag Crockett for justice. All eyes shifted back to Hawley, waiting for his reaction. Would he sneer? Would he mock? Would he dare? The cameras swung to his face, capturing the curl of his lip, the arrogance rising. And across a nation now holding its breath, one question burned. Will Josh Hawley dare to dismiss her suffering? Emily's last sob still trembled in the microphones when Josh Hawley leaned forward, his smirk slicing through the fragile silence. Like a blade, he let out a sharp, disdainful laugh that made the chamber bristle. "Debt is a choice," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Don't make the rest of us pay for your bad decisions." The words landed like a bomb, shattering the emotion of the testimony just moments before. Gasps rippled through the rows of senators. The gallery erupted, students shouting, some on their feet, others in tears, security moving to restore order. CNN's chyron blazed across screens nationwide, in bold rate. "Hawley to student, deal with it." Reporters typed furiously, their eyes wide, knowing they had just witnessed a line that would detonate online. Outside, the chants from the protesters turned into a furious roar, the rhythm shifting from sorrow to rage, fists pounding against barricades as if the building itself were on trial. Hawley doubled down, his voice growing louder, feeding off the chaos. "Actions have consequences," he barked. "Nobody forced you to sign on the dotted line. Nobody guaranteed life would be fair. Work harder, work longer, take responsibility. That's what the rest of America does. Maybe if you made better choices, you wouldn't be drowning." His tone was merciless, calculated cruelty dressed as common sense. He looked directly at Emily, still seated and trembling, and added with a chilling smile, If you can't pay it back, maybe you shouldn't have gone to college at all." The chamber shook with outrage. A senator slammed his hand on the desk. Students in the gallery shouted shame, while guards rushed to contain them. MSNBC cut live to commentators, already calling Hawley's words a political suicide note. Twitter exploded with the hashtag Hawley Heartless, climbing past 1 million mentions in minutes. Memes sprouted instantly. Screenshots of Emily's tear-streaked face side by side with Hawley's sneer, captioned compassion versus cruelty. And there, at the heart of the storm, sat Jasmine Crockett. Her body was still, but her fists clenched tight on the desk, knuckles whitening, nails biting into her palms. Her eyes never left Hawley, cold and sharp as a blade, her silence more dangerous than any outburst. The cameras found her face, her restrained fury radiating through the screen, the nation waiting, begging, for her to strike back. Hawley mistook her silence for weakness. He leaned back in his chair, smug, letting the applause from his small cluster of allies wash over him. That the air had shifted, the audience could feel it, the reporters could sense it, and the control room director whispered into his headset, "Stay on, Crockett, she's about to explode." The tension coiled tighter and tighter, the chamber buzzing like a live wire, the entire country perched on the edge of their seats. And as Emily bowed her head in silent humiliation, Crockett's fist finally lifted from the desk, her eyes burning with unspoken fire. How will she strike back at such cruelty? The chamber quaked with the echo of Hawley's words, still hanging. Like smoke after an explosion, Emily sat frozen, her hands shaking in her lap, the image of a young woman publicly humiliated for daring to speak her truth. Reporters exchanged wide-eyed glances, tens racing, while the gallery bristled with anger. And then, like a storm breaking against stone, Jasmine Crockett rose. Her voice cracked like thunder across the chamber. "That's not just arrogance. That's cruelty wrapped in privilege." The word slammed into the air, sharp and undeniable. Students in the gallery erupted, rising to their feet in a wave of applause and shouts that rattled the rafters. The gavel banged for order, but the no's only grew louder, cheers mixing with chants of her name. "Crockett! Crockett!" Emily's tear-streaked face lifted, her eyes locking on the congresswoman who had transformed her pain into defiance. The split-screen broadcast filled with dueling images, Hawley sneering, Crockett ablaze with righteous fury. She pressed forward, every syllable a blade. "You dare lecture a young woman about choices when corporations, the same corporations lining your campaign coffers, profit off her misery. You sit there and smile, pretending to defend working families while selling them out behind closed doors. That's not leadership, Senator Hawley, that's betrayal." Gasps rippled, pens clatter. A reporter whispered into his phone, "She's cutting him to pieces." MSNBC's commentators, voices shaking with awe, called it the most human moment in Congress this year, their words already going viral alongside hashtags #Crockett strikes back and #justice for Emily. Hawley's face twitched, his confidence cracking under the relentless weight of her words. He tried to interrupt, leaning into his mic, but Crockett's woes barreled over him, unyielding, carrying the raw pain of millions shackled by debt. "Fairness," she spat, her eyes narrowing into steel. "Fairness is when a generation can dream without being strangled by debt collectors. Fairness is when politicians stop serving Wall Street and start serving Main Street. And fairness, Senator, is something you wouldn't recognize if it stood right in front of you." The gallery roared. Even some staffers in the corners of the chamber exchanged furtive nods. She slammed her palm against the red folder lying before her, the sound echoing through every microphone, silencing even the protests from Hawley's allies. The gesture sent a chill rippling through the room. What was inside? Reporters leaned forward, cameras adjusted, tweets fired like sparks. "What's in the folder?" The speculation ignited across the nation, millions glued to screens, sensing the bomb yet to be detonated. Crockett drew in a long, steady breath, her chest rising as though she held the fury of every debt-burdened American inside her lungs. Her voice dropped to a dangerous calm, each word deliberate. "You call it entitlement. I call it survival. You call it bad choices. I call it systemic change, and you call this politics. No, this is life and death for millions, and I will not let you mock them into silence." The gallery rose again, a standing ovation so thunderous. The chairman's gavel was powerless against it. Hawley shifted in his seat, tugging at his collar, his smirk fading into unease. For the first time that night, He looked cornered, the predator suddenly aware the prey had teeth. Yet Crockett did not open the folder. Not yet. She let the tension swell, the unanswered question blaze across every screen. She turned, eyes burning, into Hawley, and rested her hand on the crimson cover like a general holding a final weapon. She smiled faintly, just enough to terrify. The chamber held its breath, the crowd outside chanting louder, the internet bowling with theories, but Crockett hadn't yet unleashed the real evidence. The thunder of applause had barely subsided when Jasmine Crockett placed both hands on the red folder and pulled it open with a slow, deliberate motion. The microphones picked up the sharp rustle of paper, a sound that sliced through the chamber. Louder than the gavel, every head turned, cameras zoomed so close that the faint glimmer of the staples could be seen, and in the gallery, the students held their breath as if awaiting a verdict. Crockett's voice dropped, low and steady. A blade wrapped in velvet. Let's talk about choices, Senator Hawley. Let's talk about who's really paying your bills. She lifted the first sheet high, her fingers trembling just enough to betray the weight of what she held. According to these financial disclosures, Josh Hawley's campaign received $3.5 million from student loan corporations. The words detonated like dynamite. Gasps shot through the chamber. Reporters lunged forward in their seats, some shouting over each other, the press box exploding with no's. $3.5 million, which corporations? Someone screamed, while another voice cut through. When did these payments happen? Security guards stiffened as the gallery erupted, students pointing fingers, chanting bought and paid for, bought and paid for. The control room scrambled, graphics slamming onto the broadcast. Breaking. Crockett accuses Hawley of taking $3.5 million from loan corporations on MSNBC. A commentator's voice quivered live. This is it. This is the moment we've been waiting for. Twitter ignited instantly. Hashtag spiraling into a firestorm. Hashtag Hawley exposed. Hashtag Crockett files. Hashtag 3.5 million. Clips of her words went viral before she had even finished the sentence. Millions watching in real time. As the ground under Hawley's feet began to crumble, Crockett leaned closer to the microphone. Her eyes locked on Hawley. $3.5 million, Senator, that's not support, that's ownership. While students are shackled to loans they can't escape, you're shackled to the very corporations profiting off their misery. She slapped the page onto the desk with a thud, the echo making the front row flinch. Hawley's jaw tightened, his eyes darting toward the papers as if they were a live grenade. Hawley tried to speak, raising his hand, but his words were drowned out by the cacophony. Reporters shouted louder. Students in the gallery chanted. The crowd outside roared until the marble walls seemed to shake. The chairman's gavel banged furiously, but the chamber was no longer under his control. It belonged to the evidence in Crockett's hands. She turned another page, her voice sharpening. Let's be clear, these aren't rumors, these are documented contributions, money wired, checks written, dates signed. Do you want me to read them all, Senator? Because I will. The tension spiked, the silence of anticipation cutting briefly through the storm. Cameras zoomed tighter, catching every bead of sweat sliding down Hawley's temple. Crockett held the pages aloft once more, her face set like granite, the weight of a nation's fury behind her. The gallery leaned forward, hungry for every word, and the internet boiled with a single question that seemed to rise from every screen across America. What else is buried in these papers? The chamber was still buzzing from the $3.5 million revelation when Jasmine Crockett reached back into the red folder, her movement slow, deliberate, every eye in the room tracking her hand. She lifted a thinner stack of papers, her gaze never leaving Josh Hawley, who now sat rigid, his jaw clamped so tightly it looked carved from stone. The camera zoomed closer, catching the sweat beating at his temple, the flicker of unease he tried and failed to hide. Crockett's voice sliced through the nose like a blade. Financial contributions are one thing, but what about the promises made in return? She raised the page higher, and the room leaned forward as if drawn by gravity. Here are leaked emails between corporate lobbyists and your campaign staff, Senator Hawley. And in their own words, quote, Hawley will protect us against debt, forgiveness, end quote. The chamber erupted, reporters shouting over each other, the gallery bowling over with fury. Students pointed down at Hawley, screaming corrupt, corrupt, while security rushed to contain the chaos. MSNBC and Lev with the headline, Bombshell, Crockett unveils leaked emails linking Hawley to lone lobbyists. The cameras cut back to Hawley, zooming tight on his face, his jaw flexed, lips pressed thin, his hand twitching against the desk as though reaching for a defense that wasn't there. On Fox News, a split screen showed pundits scrambling, their voices stumbling, to spin the narrative. We don't know the authenticity. This could be a setup, standard politics. But their forced smiles betrayed panic. Twitter exploded under the hashtag Hawley emails. Millions of posts flooding the feed within minutes, the words "protect us" trending on their own. Crockett didn't let the storm settle. She read again, louder this time so the words rang through every microphone. Protect us against debt forgiveness. Protect us against the American people. She let the last line linger, her eyes drilling into Hawley like a spotlight burning through glass. The chamber fell into stunned silence, broken only by the furious clatter of reporters typing, desperate to capture every syllable. Hawley finally tried to speak, his voice breaking. These are lies, fabrications, political stunts. But his protests were drowned by the crowd outside, their chants echoing through the marble walls. Not for sale. Not for sale. His words crack under the weight of evidence, his composure unraveling as cameras devour every twitch, every bead of sweat, every flicker of fear in his eyes. Crockett laid the papers down with surgical precision, her hand steady, her voice low but lethal. $3.5 million. Promises in writing. And a nation drowning in debt while you sit here pretending to defend plumbers in Missouri. Tell me, Senator, who are you really protecting? The room held its breath, the tension so thick it seemed to vibrate. And across America, millions of viewers asked the same question, their eyes locked on Hawley's crumbling mask. Is this evidence damning enough to break him? The chamber shook with the weight of the revelations, tension stretching like a wire. Ready to snap, Josh Hawley suddenly erupted, his voice booming through the microphone with raw fury. Lies. Political theater. This is nothing but a circus act from a desperate congresswoman. He slammed his fist on the table, the echo rattling water glasses and forcing the cameras to lurch toward him. His face burned crimson, his jaw tight, eyes darting like a cornered animal fighting for oxygen. But Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't raise her voice, didn't meet his fire with fire. Instead, she leaned into the microphone, her tone calm, measured, colder than steel. Then explain, Senator Hawley, she said, every word like the pull of a trigger. Why the FBI already has these emails. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, heavy and suffocating. Then the chamber detonated. Gasps broke out in waves, some senators' mouths falling open as if the ground had vanished beneath them. Journalists screamed questions into the air, their voices overlapping in a chaotic chorus. When did the FBI get them? Has Hawley been contacted? Are charges coming? The gallery erupted, students pounding the railings, shouting, "Shame, shame," while guards rushed to contain the frenzy. The chairman's gavel hammered down like gunfire, with splintering under the repeated blows. But it was useless. The hearing had transformed into a battlefield. The cameras cut to Hawley, zooming in mercilessly on his face. Beads of sweat rolled down his temple as he tried to mask panic with anger. His lips curled into a sneer, but his eyes betrayed the storm inside. He barked again. This is a setup. This is a smear campaign orchestrated by my enemies. Yet, his voice cracked mid-sentence, and the microphones caught it. On the split screens flashing across America, viewers saw not defiance, a desperation. Crockett remained motionless, her hands folded over the red folder like a general surveying the wreckage of her enemy's defenses. The contrast was cinematic. Hawley raging, flailing, unraveling, while Crockett stood firm, her silence radiating power. MSNBC cut live to commentators calling it the most explosive clash in Congress in a generation. CNN plastered its chyron in bold. Crockett, FBI possesses Hawley emails. On Twitter, the hashtag Hawley trapped shot to #1 worldwide within minutes. The gavel slammed again and again, but order refused to return. The chamber pulsed with chaos, protesters outside screaming, cameras flashing like lightning, the nation glued to screens. And in the middle of it all, Josh Hawley sat hunched and sweating, caught between denial and dread, his world shrinking by the second. The image burned itself into history. Crockett calm as ice, Hawley unraveling under the weight of his own words. And as the broadcast cut to commercial, one question echoed across America, from dorm rooms to living rooms to union halls: is Hawley trapped with no way out? The chamber still buzzed with the aftershocks of Crockett's strike when the chairman called the next witness. The doors opened, and a bespectacled professor walked in carrying a stack of papers and a laptop under his arm, his step steady but heavy with the knowledge that every word he spoke could shift the balance of a nation. Cameras tracked his every move as he adjusted the microphone, cleared his throat, and let his opening line fall like a stone into deep water. Canceling student debt, he declared, could boost America's GDP by $100 billion annually. The numbers hit the chamber with the force of artillery. Behind him, screens lit up, charts and graphs climbing in sharp red and green lines, projections flashing like warning flares in the dark. Reporters craned their necks to snap pictures, their phones glowing with alerts as producers in control rooms across the network sparked, "Get those graphics on screen now." The split-screen broadcast showed the professor's calm delivery against the rising wave of data. Unemployment falling, consumer spending surging, home ownership rates climbing back from the dead. Crockett nodded slowly, her eyes burning with vindication, as if each data point were another arrow striking her opponent's armor. Her hands rested on the red folder, but she didn't open it, not yet. She let the evidence from the witness carve through the nose, a scalpel cutting away the lies Hawley had stacked like sandbags. The gallery murmured approval, students clapping softly, their faces lighting up for the first time all day with something resembling hope. Josh Hawley rolled his eyes, the gesture caught perfectly by the cameras, his disdain splashed across millions of screens. He leaned back in his chair, lips curled in mockery, and whispered something to an aide that drew laughter from his small circle of allies. The professor ignored him, voice steady. Numbers falling like hammer blows, $100 billion annually. That's not a bailout. That's an investment in America's future workforce. That's money back in the pockets of families, money fueling small businesses, money keeping the next generation alive. The gallery erupted in applause, a wave of sound that the gavel struggled to contain. Outside, chants shifted, protesters echoing the phrase through megaphones, 100 billion, 100 billion. The sound rolled through the chamber like thunder, shaking even the marble pillars. The professor raised another page, this one showing racial disparities. Black and Latino students disproportionately burdened. Entire communities locked out of opportunity. He spoke softly but firmly. This isn't just economics. This is civil rights. Crockett's jaw tightened, her nod sharper now, the emotion in her eyes matched only by the fury in her silence. Hawley snorted audibly into his mic, his contempt amplified for the whole nation to hear. Some in the gallery booed, reporters scribbled, and producers whispered that his smirk might become the image of the night. The charts lingered on screen, numbers glowing like neon scars across the broadcast, a stark contrast between cold fact and hot rhetoric. The professor stepped back, his testimony complete, leaving the data to hang in the air heavier than any insult. The chamber seemed to hold its breath, the silence brimming with a single question that clawed through the nose and reached every living room in America. Can facts cut through political spin? The professor's testimony still hung in the chamber like smoke after an explosion, charts and numbers glowing on the giant screens, when Josh Hawley shot forward in his chair. He gripped the microphone with both hands, knuckles pale, and unleashed his fury with the rhythm of a street preacher. This is not about numbers, this is about elites versus workers. His voice cracked through the chamber, booming so hard the glass panels rattled. Reporters' heads snapped up, pens racing as they recognized the start of another headline moment. Hawley jabbed a finger toward Jasmine Crockett, his eyes blazing for the cameras. "Look at her," he barked. "She sits here, lecturing hard-working Missourians, pretending she knows their struggle. But she's part of the elite class that benefits from this so-called forgiveness. Ivy League lawyers, Washington insiders, politicians who think they know better than the people who keep this country running." Applause flared from his allies, echoing with chants from the counter-protesters outside, their voices seeping through the walls. "Pay your debts. Pay your debts." The camera feed split, Fox News running the moment live with a chyron. Hawley, standing up for workers, his tone grew sharper, his body lunging toward the mic as if he were challenging the nation itself. "My people in Missouri wake up at 5 a.m. to work double shifts, not for government handouts, not for bailouts, but to put food on the table. And now you want them to pay for the bad baits of elites who chase degrees they can't afford. That's not justice, that's robbery." Gasps and applause collided in the chamber, the tension so thick it seemed to bend the walls. Some senators looked down, unwilling to meet the cameras. Others nodded, eyes locked on Crockett, waiting for her counterstrike. The gavel hammered for order, but the chaos only fed Hawley's performance, his voice climbing with each word, sweat shining on his forehead, veins tightening along his neck, and then, silence broken only by Crockett's voice, cool and cutting. Like a knife sliding across glass, she leaned forward, eyes locked on him, her words precise and devastating. Elites, she repeated, her tone dripping with scorn. The elites are not the students drowning in debt. The elites are the bankers funding you. Her hand dropped to the red folder again, fingers tapping its surface like a ticking clock. $3.5 million, Senator. That's the real robbery and you're the getaway driver. The gallery erupted in cheers, students rising to their feet with thunderous applause, while Hawley's smirk faltered under the weight of her words. On MSNBC, commentators broke in live, declaring it the cleanest, sharpest strike of the night. Twitter convulsed, hashtags clashing, hashtag Hawley for workers battling hashtag bankers pet, and hashtag Crockett cuts deep. The chamber quivered between fury and awe, the cameras darting back and forth, the gavel hammering uselessly. And across America, millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens, asking the only question that mattered now: who will the public believe? The chamber still vibrated with Crockett's cutting retort, the echo of bankers funding you, rolling through the rafters, when she rose again, not to shout this time, but to claim the room with silence. She placed one hand over the red folder, the other gripping the edge of the desk, and let her voice emerge lower, steadier, threaded with memory. Let's be honest about who carries this burden. It isn't Wall Street, it isn't the political donors who bankroll campaigns, it's black families, Latino families, poor families, first-generation students who did everything this country told them to do: study, work hard, dream big, only to be punished for daring to believe in the American promise. Her words fell like heavy stones, each one drawing murmurs from the gallery. Students leaned forward, tears flashing in their eyes, while the cameras zoomed close on Crockett's face. She did not blink as she continued. I know this pain because I lived it. My parents worked themselves to the bone, my mother in classrooms, underfunded and ignored, my father sweating in jobs that broke his back but never broke his pride. They told me education was the key. But when I walked across that stage, diploma in hand, I didn't step into freedom, I stepped into debt. The room was utterly still, save for the rapid clicking of reporters' keyboards capturing every word. Crockett's voice swelled, steady but quivering with fire. This isn't just economics, this is civil rights for a new generation. Debt is not colorblind. The numbers don't lie. Black graduates owe on average nearly twice as much as their white peers. Latino families see their children shackled before they even start their first job. This is a system designed to keep us in chains, different chains, but chains nonetheless. Her hand struck the desk, punctuating the word like the crack of a whip, and the gallery erupted in applause, students rising to their feet. She pressed on, her voice rising now, carrying the weight of every protest sigh, every chant outside. You want to talk about fairness, Senator Hawley? Fairness is not a plumber in Missouri paying for someone else's dream. Fairness is making sure that plumber's child has the same chance at a future without being crushed by debt. Fairness is not mocking a young woman for her tear. The chamber was still vibrating from Crockett's fiery monologue when Josh Hawley leaned forward, his back against the wall, his voice dripping with desperation masked as arrogance. His lips curled into a sneer, and then he spat it out like poison into the microphone. You're just a ghetto performer, Jasmine. The words cracked across the chamber like a gunshot, reverberating through every corner, piercing through the chants outside, and striking directly into the hearts of millions watching live. For a split second, the room froze in disbelief, stunned, silence stretching longer than breath. Then it broke. Audible gasps surged like a tidal wave, followed by cries of outrage, shame, shame. Erupting from the gallery, students pounded the railings with their fists, their chants for justice replaced by raw fury at the racial insult hurled in the nation's capital. Even seasoned senators blinked in shock, some exchanging glances as if to ask, did he really just say that? The chairman's gavel hammered down, wood slamming against wood in rapid fire, but it could not contain the storm. Reporters sprang from their seats, shouting questions into the chaos, their words drowned in the cacophony. Did you just hear that? Is this the end of Hawley's career? On CNN, the Chiron updated within seconds. Hawley the Crockett Ghetto performer. All MSNBC commentators gasped live, one whispering, "That's a career-ending remark if I've ever heard one." Twitter exploded with hashtag Hawley exposed and hashtag shame on Hawley, trending worldwide in under 3 minutes. Cameras zoomed tight on Crockett. Her face was still, her eyes cold and cutting, the fury behind them sharp enough to cleave stone. One of her fists clenched slowly on the desk, the microphone catching the faint scrape of her nails against the wood. Emily, the student witness, buried her face in her hands, sobbing anew, while others in the gallery shouted in solidarity, "We stand with you, Jasmine." The chamber became a battlefield of sound jeers, boos, applause from Hawley's small cluster of allies, the chaos captured and broadcast to every corner of the nation. Hawley, flushed and defiant, leaned back in his chair with a smirk that seemed carved out of spite, as if he believed his cruelty could not touch him. But the cameras betrayed him, catching the twitch in his jaw, the bead of sweat on his temple, the way his hand gripped the desk just a little too tightly. Outside, the crowd thundered louder, their chants now transformed into Crockett, Crockett, until the Capitol itself seemed to tremble. And there, in the eye of the storm, Jasmine Crockett did not move, her silence heavier than Hawley's insult, her stare sharper than any words. The world waited, breaths caught, hearts racing, as the cliffhanger hung over the chamber like a blade suspended midair. Will Crockett let this stand? The chamber still buzzed with outrage from Hawley's slur when Jasmine Crockett's fist came down on the desk like a hammer. The sound cracked through the microphones, sharp enough to silence even the gavel. Her eyes blazed, her voice erupting with fury that shook the rafters. "Don't mistake my roots for weakness, I carry them as strength." The words hit the air like fire, igniting the gallery, pulling shouts of support from every corner. Applause thundered, rolling in waves that drowned Hawley's smug smirk. Students in the gallery leapt to their feet, fists raised, chanting her name, their voices so loud they bled through the walls to the protests outside. The crowd beyond the barricades answered, a deafening roar that surged back into the chamber, until the marble itself seemed to tremble. Cameras panned wildly, capturing the moment from every angle. The congresswoman standing tall, defiant, a warrior carved against the storm. Her voice cut through the chants, each word striking like a drumbeat. "My story isn't shame, it's power. My community didn't raise me to bow to men like you. They raised me to fight for those still silenced, still shackled by debt, still mocked for daring to dream." The students screamed louder, some with tears streaking their faces, others stamping their feet against the floor until the vibrations shook water glasses on senators' desks. Reporters scribbled furiously, one whispering into a hot mic, "This moment will be replayed for decades." Hawley shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, but his eyes betrayed the flicker of panic. The insult he had hurled now boomeranged back, transforming into Crockett's weapon, her fury weaponized into resolve. On MSNBC, a commentator shouted over the footage, "She's flipped the insult into the rallying cry of the night." On Twitter, hashtag strength not shame exploded across timelines, trending above hashtag Hawley exposed, each clip of her pounding the desk spreading like wildfire. The chamber was hers now, every heartbeat, every headline, every camera trained on the fire she unleashed. Hawley's smirk had vanished, replaced by the look of a man who had lit a match and now watched helplessly as the blaze consumed the room. And as Crockett stood unflinching, her voice a weapon sharpened by generations before her, the question burned across every screen in America. But has Hawley underestimated the storm he just unleashed? The echo of Crockett's fists on the desk had barely faded before the internet seized the moment and turned it into fire. Within minutes, the clip of her standing tall, her voice thunderous, "Don't mistake my roots for weakness, I carry them as strength," was everywhere. On TikTok, it was stitched into protest footage outside the Capitol, chants sensing perfectly with her words. On Twitter, the video rocketed past 5 million views in under an hour, captions blazing, the line that silenced Hawley. By nightfall, the number climbed to 12 million. The comment sections flooded with declarations like, "This is the moment the tide turned." Cable news scrambled to catch up with the viral frenzy. CNN ran the headline, "Crockett's fury captures America." MSNBC commentators replayed the moment frame by frame, one declaring, "That's not just a comeback, that's the line that could change the election." Even Fox News, split-screened with a panel of rattled pundits, struggled to spin it. One voice muttering, It's dangerous when emotion beats logic on national television. But the damage was done. Hawley's insult had transformed into Crockett's rallying cry, echoing from dorm rooms to union halls, from crowded subways to dinner tables across the country. Outside the Capitol, chants of strength, not shame, roared, matching the hashtags dominating the digital landscape. Hashtag strength not shame. Hashtag Crockett vs Hawley. Hashtag 12 million strong. Protesters held up phones streaming her words on loop, their screens glowing like torches in the night. The sound of her desk slam reverberated not just through the chamber, but through a nation hungry for someone to fight back. Inside, Hawley sat stiff in his chair, his face a mask cracking under the relentless barrage of headlines and applause. His allies whispered frantically, eyes darting toward reporters who no longer looked at him, but only at Crockett, the center of the storm. His smirk was gone. His eyes betrayed unease as the control room fed live updates into the broadcast. 12 million views and climbing. America wasn't just watching anymore, it was choosing sides. And as Jasmine Crockett returned to her seat, the red folder still untouched but glowing with promise, the weight of the chamber seemed to tilt toward her. The gavel hammered, the chairman barking for order, but the story had already slipped beyond these marble walls and into history's bloodstream. The question now lingered, sharp and electrifying, hanging over Josh Hawley's every breath. How will he retaliate with the nation against him? The night after the hearing, America's airwaves burned. Every cable network opened with the same explosive chyron flashing in red. Crockett exposes Hawley's ties. CNN replayed the clip of her slamming the red folder down, the sound edited like a gunshot. MSNBC rolled a highlight reel of her fiery comeback spliced against Hawley's sneers, one anchor declaring, "This was not just a clash, it was a reckoning." Even Fox News, normally his shield, scrambled with split-screen pundits, some visibly shaken as they struggled to spin the evidence away. The clip of Crockett's bankers funding you line rolled again and again, seared into the national consciousness. By dawn, the fallout had a number. Polls lit up the screen like breaking news alerts. Hawley's approval rating nosedived 8 points overnight, the sharpest drop of his career. Graphics screamed the numbers, 38% approval, down from 46%. On Twitter, memes spread like wildfire, showing Hawley drowning under a mountain of debt bills, captioned, "Funded by bankers, buried by truth." The hashtag Hawley Heartless clashed with hashtag strength not shame, both trending worldwide. While clips of Crockett comforting Emily reached 20 million views in less than 12 hours, newsrooms buzzed with predictions of political aftershocks. Analysts speculated if donors would abandon Hawley, if allies would turn on him, if this moment would mark the beginning of his political decline. A Washington Post columnist wrote, "Rarely has a single hearing shifted public opinion so dramatically. Crockett has not only cornered her opponent, she has redefined the battlefield." The chamber's echoes had spilled far beyond Capitol Hill, embedding themselves in the daily conversations of Americans who had never before tuned into such hearings. Meanwhile, outside the Capitol, protesters camped overnight, their chants echoing under floodlights, "Not for sale, not for sale." Inside congressional offices, aides whispered about the FBI's involvement, reporters hounded Hawley's staff for comment, and rumors swirled of internal fractures in his camp. His defenders looked smaller with each passing hour, their talking points drowned beneath the roar of a narrative too powerful to contain. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett's face dominated every broadcast, calm, fiery, unyielding, the image of a warrior standing where others flinched. The storm she unleashed was no longer confined to marble walls or a viral clip. It had become a movement, a reckoning, a firestorm devouring everything in its path. The question now hung in the air, unavoidable and unforgiving, whispered in newsrooms, classrooms, and kitchen tables across America. Is his career crumbling in real time? Cornered and bleeding politically, Josh Hawley lunged for the microphone with the desperation of a man watching his empire collapse. His voice cracked but grew louder, fueled by sheer survival. "These so-called documents are nothing but fabrications," he barked, spit catching on the mic. "Congresswoman Crockett has manufactured this entire charade. I demand an immediate investigation into her, her staff, and whoever is feeding her these lies." The words rang out like a last-ditch artillery strike, meant to scorch the battlefield. Even as he lost ground, gasps swept through the chamber. Reporters froze mid-sentence, their pens hanging above paper, stunned by the audacity of the counterattack. In the gallery, students spewed furiously, their chants of shame. Shame, swelling until security scrambled to contain the eruption. On Fox News, the chyron flipped instantly. Hawley demands probe into Crockett. His allies clapped weakly, but their applause echoed hollow, drowned beneath the growing roar of disbelief. Crockett didn't rise, she didn't need to. She leaned back, arms crossed, eyes locked on Hawley with a calm so sharp it was terrifying. Her silence made his fury look smaller, more desperate, a cornered animal gnashing its teeth. The tension built, cameras hunting for every flicker of fear in his eyes. And then, like a lightning bolt through the chaos, the FBI released a statement to every major outlet. The documents were real. The emails were authentic. The investigation wasn't into Crockett, it was into Hawley. The announcement detonated across the chamber, shaking it like an earthquake. CNN broke the news in bold red. FBI confirms, Hawley docs authentic. MSNBC cut in with breathless commentary. This is a catastrophic blow. On Twitter, hashtags ignited instantly. Hashtag Hawley lies and hashtag downfall in real time. Phones buzzed in the gallery as students screamed with vindication, their chants shifting to Crockett. Crockett. The red folder on her desk now looked less like evidence and more like a weapon that had already struck its target. Hawley's face drained of color, his defiance collapsing under the weight of the confirmation. He stumbled for words, stammering about bias and deep state conspiracies, but the microphones caught the tremor in his voice. The chamber was no longer his arena. It belonged to Crockett, to the truth, and to the millions watching live who had just witnessed his last gambit implode. The gavel hammered, but order was gone. Hawley sat there, sweating, unraveling, his own strategy backfiring in real time. And across America, the question burned hotter than ever. Has he just sealed his own downfall? The moment the FBI confirmation hit the airwaves, the chamber erupted into pandemonium. Senators shouted over one another, aides scrambled with phones pressed to their ears, and half the gallery surged to their feet chanting Crockett's name, while the other half jeered in rage. The sound was deafening, a rolling storm of voices crashing against marble walls, the gavel pounding like a desperate drumbeat no one could hear. The broadcast screens flickered with split shots. Crockett calm and unyielding, Hawley sweating and flailing, the gallery on fire, the protest outside shaking the barricades. One senator stormed out, his papers scattering like white confetti across the floor. Another shouted, "This is a sham," before slamming the door so hard the microphones ticked up the echo. Students in the gallery pressed forward, fists raised, chanting "Not for sale. Not for sale," until guards rushed in, their presence only fueling the chaos. MSNBC anchors whisper over live footage, "This looks less like a hearing and more like a battlefield." On CNN, the chyron screamed, "Congress in chaos, Hawley cornered." Through it all, Jasmine Crockett did not move from her seat. She leaned forward, eyes burning, her hand resting on the red folder like a general guarding the trigger to her final weapon. The cameras couldn't get enough of her face stone calm in the middle of a political earthquake. Every headline, every split-screen replay painted her as the anchor in a storm that threatened to rip Congress apart. Twitter exploded with hashtag Crockett unshaken, the clip of her cold stare looping endlessly as America held its breath. Hawley tried again, shouting into the mic, his voice cracking, "This is political theater." But his words were swallowed by the thunder of chants and the clatter of walkouts. Aides tugged at his sleeve, urging him to leave, but he yanked his arm free, his pride chaining him to the fire. He was unraveling on live television, every second another nail hammered into the coffin of his credibility. The chamber boiled hotter, the tension climbing past anything the gavel could contain. It was no longer a hearing, it was a spectacle, a live Hollywood climax where reputations live or died in the glare of cameras. Crockett sat posed, the red folder untouched but glowing with menace, her silence more powerful than any scream. And as the broadcast cut to a wide shot of chaos consuming the room, one question burned across the nation like a fuse hissing toward detonation. What final card will Crockett play? The chamber was a storm, papers scattered, senators red-faced, students chanting, until their throats broke when Jasmine Crockett rose one final time. She didn't slam the desk, she didn't shout. Instead, she lifted her chin, squared her shoulders, and locked her eyes directly on the camera lens broadcasting to millions. The room stilled, as if the nation itself leaned closer to listen. Her voice, calm but thunderous in its clarity, cut through the chaos like a blade through glass. This is not about politics, this is about our children's freedom from chains of debt. For a heartbeat, silence held the room hostage. Even Hawley froze, his mouth half open, unable to fire back. Then it hit, the eruption of applause so loud it rattled the rafters. Students in the gallery leapt to their feet, tears streaking their faces, chanting her name until the marble shook. The protesters outside answered with a roar that rolled like an earthquake into the chamber. Cameras spun wildly, capturing every angle, Crockett standing tall, the embodiment of defiance and hope, her words already being clipped, replayed, and immortalized across screens nationwide. Reporters scrambled, shouting into phones, their voices cracking. "She's just delivered the line of the night, maybe the line of the year." MSNBC cut live commentary mid-sentence to replay it again, chyron blazing. "Crockett, this is about freedom." CNN Nankas leaned forward, eyes wide, one whispering, that could shift the entire debate. On Twitter, hashtags exploded, hashtag freedom from debt, hashtag Crockett closing blow, hashtag chains broken, with millions of retweets cascading faster than networks could measure. Hawley sat pale, fists clenched, his earlier fury reduced to silence. The gavel pounded but no one listened. Crockett had seized the narrative, the hearing, and perhaps the nation itself. Her words didn't just strike at policy, they struck at conscience, at the marrow of a country suffocating under the weight of its own broken promises. The applause thundered on, drowning every objection, every attempt to restore order. And in living rooms, dormitories, union halls, and kitchen tables across America, viewers replayed her words again and again, asking themselves if they had just witnessed a turning point. The cameras held on her steady gaze, unflinching, resolute, her voice still echoing through the chaos. And as the night swallowed the Capitol, one question burned hotter than any gavel, sharper than any insult: can one speech shift a nation's conscience? The roar of applause still thundered when the cameras swung back to Josh Hawley. He was no longer the firebrand pounding his fist, no longer the swaggering senator sneering at students. He slumped in his chair, shoulders hunched, eyes downcast, his face glistening under the unforgiving lights. Around him, his allies stared at their notes, avoiding eye contact, leaving him stranded in silence. The once commanding voice of Missouri now looked like a man sinking before the entire nation. Commentators didn't wait. On CNN, a microphone caught one whispering laugh, "Is this the end of his career?" MSNBC replayed Crockett's closing blow on loop, her words juxtaposed against Hawley's insult in stark, damning contrast. Fox News panels fractured, some defending, others shaking their heads in disbelief, their voices cracking as they searched for a narrative to soften the blow. Twitter erupted, timelines flooding with clips, memes, and fury. Hashtag Crockett for Justice climbing into the #1 spot worldwide in less than 2 hours. Outside the Capitol, students turned the protest into a vigil of triumph. Phone screens glowed in the darkness, each one replaying Crockett's words. "This is about our children's freedom from chains of debt, chance of strength, not shame." Carried into the night, their echoes blending with car horns and passing sirens. Across campuses, dormitories filled with cheers as her speech went viral, clips hitting 30 million views before dawn. It wasn't just a hearing anymore, it was a movement. Inside, reporters swarmed the hallways, their questions knives slicing into Hawley's aides. Will he resign? Has he lost support? Is an ethics probe coming? No answers came, only silence and shaken heads. Meanwhile, Crockett emerged to flashing cameras, her calm defiance unnamed, her red folder still tucked under her arm like a symbol of unfinished reckoning. The press surged forward, shouting over one another, "Congresswoman, will you run for higher office? Do you see yourself as the future of this fight?" She did not answer directly, only gave a measured nod, her eyes steady, her silence speaking louder than words. In newsrooms across America, analysts leaned forward, voices tense with urgency. "We may be watching the birth of a national leader," one declared. This wasn't just a victory, hearing it was a turning point in public opinion. Hawley sat alone, his figure shrinking into political irrelevance as the narrative left him behind. Crockett's voice, her fury, her truth had eclipsed his career in real time. And as the night deepened and hashtags blazed brighter than headlines, one question carved itself into the conscience of a nation. Will this propel Jasmine Crockett into national leadership? The chamber was still, the air thick with the aftershocks of chaos, when Jasmine Crockett rose for the final time. The red folder sat closed before her, its secrets already unleashed, but her presence radiated the weight of something greater than evidence conviction. She looked not at Hawley, not at the senators, but straight into the cameras, into the homes of millions watching across the nation. Her voice carried not the fury of earlier clashes, but something deeper, steadier, almost reverent. "Justice isn't charity," she said, her tone slicing through the silence. "It's a promise." The words lingered like a tolling bell. Students in the gallery held their breath, their signs trembling in their hands, while reporters froze mid-scribble. Crockett continued, her cadence measured, deliberate, each phrase like a stone laid in the foundation of a new creed. "America cannot thrive if its young are shackled by debt. We cannot dream if we are chained. We cannot build if we are broken before we even begin." Her eyes glistened, not with weakness, but with a defiant fire that made the cameras zoom tighter, capturing every flicker of emotion. Hawley sat motionless, his figure dimmed, his earlier roar now reduced to a ghost haunting the back of the chamber. Around him, colleagues shifted uncomfortably, some refusing to meet Crockett's gaze, others bowing their heads as though her words indicted them all. Outside, chants softened, protesters pausing to listen, the hush of thousands carried into the chamber like the breath of history itself. Crockett's voice swelled, rising to the crescendo the night demanded. "This fight is not about me. It is not about him. It is about every American who ever worked 2 jobs and still fell behind. About every parent who sacrificed so their child could rise, only to watch that child crushed under the weight of loans. This is about a promise that if you work, if you strive, if you believe, your future will not be stolen before it begins." The applause erupted before she even finished the line, rolling like thunder, reporters shouting into phones, networks cutting in with live replays. She lifted her hand, silencing the chamber with a gesture, and delivered the final blow. "So I ask you, America, will you stand silent, or will you fight for the future?" The words reverberated beyond marble walls, beyond television screens, carried into the conscience of a nation that suddenly felt the weight of its own reflection. The camera pulled back slowly, the chamber bathed in applause, chants, and flashing lights. And over it all, the narrator's voice faded in, steady and solemn, carrying the truth into history. Sometimes a single hearing can shake a nation's soul. The lesson we can draw from this story is clear. True strength often comes from the very struggles others try to use against us. Jasmine Crockett showed that dignity, courage, and an unshakable belief in justice can turn insults into fuel and transform pain into power. In life, we will all face voices that try to belittle us or systems that seem too heady to fight, but silence only strengthens oppression. Standing firm, speaking truth, and daring to fight back can ripple far beyond ourselves. So I ask you, when your moment comes, will you stay silent, or will you rise and fight for what matters? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.